You are watching and listening to the Electronic Intifada. I am Jon Elmer. This is the Resistance Report for day 573 since October the 7th. I will be covering Yemen as usual on this episode, but we are going to start in Gaza as we do usually. We'll pull up the first map just to get people situated, as Nora reported in her great news report that you can check out. This is day 61 of total siege on the Gaza Strip. This is the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs mapping. This is the same mapping as last week. They haven't updated this map, but the Israelis have pressed their buffer zones. And as we were just talking, the Moreg corridor that runs between Rafah and Khan Yunis in the south. And we are going to start this week in the north. The Israelis said that they have carried out more than 2,000 airstrikes as of today, and they have killed 2,300 Palestinians, including 700 children, and wounded 6,000 more since the resumption of fighting on March the 18th. The siege of Gaza goes 2 weeks earlier than that, to March the 2nd. So if we take a look at the next map, we can see a zoom in here on northern Gaza. And this is the three battlefields that we'll be talking about, battle spaces. They're not really battlefields still yet. The Israelis are in the corridors, they're in the buffer zone, and they're not very often encountering built up areas at this point. But the key areas of operations that we covered last week were in the upper right corner. There is Beit Hanun on the northeast side of Gaza with the buffer zone you can see in purple overlapping with the orange, which is the displacement orders, no-go zones. And the resistance operations were in that upper corner. They were within 200, 300 meters of the fence, and they were effectively behind Israeli lines, which have pushed up to the edge of that purple. And we're going to focus on that as well this week. So more than 70% of Gaza is now buffer zone or no-go zone. 500,000 have been displaced since the March 18th resumption of the war. The war began on March 18th again with a midnight attack, a surprise attack during the ceasefire. Israel reneged on it by carrying out 80 airstrikes in less than 10 minutes, killing more than 400 people, 170 of them children. Since then, 500,000 people have been displaced in the 6 weeks, and we are now in a situation where 1.9 million people in Gaza are living in tents, living in fabric, or living in shelters. We know those shelters have mostly been destroyed, so even when you're living in a shelter, it's in a tent shelter in the schoolyard that has been already bombed. So we're going to focus on Beit Hanun right now in the upper right corner. As I said, last week we watched Breaking the Sword ambush. It was a tunnel ambush that was executed in the buffer zone. It was called Breaking the Sword as a play on the Israeli campaign names after October 7th. The Israeli military called the war Swords of Iron is what they called, what the Palestinians call Al-Aqsa Flood. And then the March 18th massacre, they called the Strengthened Sword Operation. So Breaking the Swords has been Qassam's names for this series of ambushes in Beit Hanun. And Beit Hanun, to remind viewers, was the first place the Israelis invaded on the 27th of October, 2023. And then the days before, the months before the January 2025 ceasefire were focused on Beit Hanun. And there was a series of operations that I showed you on this program, dozens of operations, ambushes of death series that showed all kinds of operations against the Israelis that took a devastating toll on the Israeli military and really pressed them into the ceasefire that had been on the table since December 2023. And the introduction of the Trump administration allowed them to reach back for that ceasefire, but it was really the resistance operations that pressed them into that position. So if we look at the next slide here, the Breaking the Sword ambush, the first one we watched, this is the fighters. We watched this last week. You can go back and watch the segment. I broke it down at length last week. But these are the fighters emerging in the thicket, out of a tunnel 300 meters from the fence, behind Israeli lines in the buffer zone, still in the Gaza Strip. 300 meters from the fence. So you can see we saw a squad of six, at least six, that we could see on camera, come out and carry out this ambush against an Israeli convoy. And they used this thicket, which you can see if we look at the next slide, you can see how they concealed themselves within this overgrowth, the spring growth in Gaza. Beit Hanun is an agricultural area. The buffer zones are agricultural areas. The Morag corridor, is an agricultural area, as you heard earlier on in the show. And so the fighters are using this. You can see in the upper right corner of this slide here, that's facing you, you can see a fighter almost completely concealed, wearing camouflage to hide in this thicket. And so the Israelis this week carried out an operation. If we look at slide number 5, Channel 12 reported on this, that the Israeli military on Monday began to burn the agricultural fields around Beit Hanun, because they thought they had found all the tunnels. That was the operation of the 252nd Division. Their operational mandate was to find the tunnels in the Beit Hanun area. So Operation Breaking the Sword clearly demonstrated that they did not find the tunnels, because that operation was carried out through a tunnel, according to the Israeli military, all of the operations that they have faced since the resumption of war have been tunnel-based operations. So in their infinite wisdom, there are scorched earth. They're literally burning the fields in hopes that that will expose the tunnels. So they've flooded the tunnels, seawater, gas. We heard about all of their explosives that they've used for the tunnels. None of them work. The tunnels still function after 18 months of war more. The tunnels are still functioning, and you can't destroy tunnels by burning fields. But this is a very symbolic visual, because the forest fires began in the Jerusalem area a few days later, not linked to this burn, but this just shows the failure of their operations against the tunnels, and it shows the strategic implications of Qassam's tunnel network that's allowed them to fight this long, and puts the Israelis in a position where Benjamin Netanyahu believes if they stop the war today and accept a ceasefire, that they will have lost the war, because they have not defeated the Qassam brigades in Gaza. So burning. Look at the next slide too. Number 6 shows a close-up that they showed on Channel 12 on Monday in Israel. But you can see there's the exact thicket, the thistles that those fighters were hiding in is now being burnt. Not clear that that's going to work for concealment, to stop the concealment. Look at the way it is now. It'll still be used. They'll probably just wear different color of shirt. So there was a second Breaking the Swords ambush here, that I'm going to tee up here. We aren't able to show you the full video. It's a twin sniper operation, something that we've seen a couple times throughout the war, but where two Al-Ghul sniper units target the same place. So you have two snipers in different positions targeting the same Israeli force, and that's what we see in this video here. But we've had to edit it to prevent these videos from being taken down. But you'll remember from last week this operation through the fields, and then these RPG attacks on the Israeli position with the Jeep upside down. There was 3 killed, at least 5 seriously wounded. And here's the Breaking the Sword ambush part 2 on the screen. The fighter says they carried out a double sniping operation against soldiers using the Qassam-made Al-Ghul rifle against new positions in the buffer zone. And here's the 4 spots that we have blurred out the soldiers, and here's the twin Qassam Al-Ghul snipers. One of the sniper operations, it said, was not on film. Here we're seeing standing on top of a Merkava tank. You have these tank driver and a special forces 𝐓𝐴 tunnel unit soldier standing on top of the tank. Both are hit by sniper fire, and then the 𝐓𝐴 unit officer comes and climbs on top of the tank to help the two soldiers who are wounded, which is something we don't see very often. Usually, the soldiers run after these sniper attacks, but the 𝐓𝐴 soldier climbs on top of the tank, and now there's three of them on top of the tank, and they're hit with a single round, which we've also seen. A single round hit two people, and the 𝐓𝐴 officer ends up feet in the air, going down into the turret hatch of the turret, which is an iconic shot that we can't show on here, but it was the source of a 𝐓𝐴𝐚 poster after the fact and many pictures of it with the boots in the air as he's going down into the tunnel. Abu Obaida, the spokesperson for the 𝐓𝐴𝐚 brigades, released a message about this operation where he said, "Our fighters continue to fight heroic battles, carry out well planned ambushes, and lie in wait for enemy forces to inflict certain death on them at the time, place, and method of our choosing. The exploits of our warriors in the field from Beit Hanun to Rafah is a source of pride. They are feats of military prowess that serve as an example for the next generation of our nation. Our fighters in combat zones and defensive ambushes are ready for confrontation and have pledged to remain steadfast until victory or martyrdom." And that is the point of these operations. The Israelis haven't moved into any built up areas for these operations until this week. And this week we saw the first operations. Last week we saw operations in Tufa in eastern Gaza City. If we look at this next map, you can see the evacuation notice for Zaytun, Shujaiya, and Tufa. These are on the eastern edge of Gaza City. And they announced that. Last week we saw the first Yasin strikes against tanks and armored bulldozers, and we could see from those operations that those bulldozers and tanks were right on the edge of town. This week there was a number of operations in Tufa. There was a Yasin strike versus tanks. There was anti-personnel IEDs in Tufa as well, and a number of rocket artillery operations and a second series of Yasin strikes. So we're starting to see that when the Israelis push into built-up areas, the resistance is there waiting for them, as we've seen all throughout this battle. They don't run around chasing the Israelis. When the Israelis move into combat zones, which have been moved, civilians have been moved out of these areas, and they fight. And this next clip is actually an interesting one. This is from the Israelis. This shows a Yasin round from their point of view. This is from their tank commander's display unit. The camera is on top of the tank, and you can see from that upper floor window, we're getting an elevated Yasin strike that appears to hit at least the 360-degree panoramic camera that the commander uses and the gunner uses for their sights. The Israelis showed this clip, and then they attached to the other side of the clip. This is just a 10-second clip. The other part was an airstrike on a building. Didn't seem like, didn't show any connection between this building being hit. But that's what, from their point of view, the Israelis put these videos out. They believe that they're showing successes when really they're showing their tank likely being penetrated here. And then the response isn't tank fire from the tank that's hit. It's an airstrike that's many minutes later, more than half an hour later at best, and it's not even clear they're targeting the same position. So that's an interesting shot. We haven't seen that shot from the inside of the tank before. If we look at number 11 here, we have Soraya Al-Quds using improvised launchers here. These are rocket artillery that we watch them fire every week. But instead of launching them on a trajectory in Tufa, you can see they've made a makeshift launcher, and they're going to just fire it directly at an Israeli military position in Tufa, which is something that they have done before. We've shown them using this tactic before, but as you can see, it seems very effective. They hit the exact spot that they want with an artillery rocket that normally is fired on a trajectory arc. but they fire it directly at that position. Also in 𝐄𝐥𝐈𝐧𝐢𝐜, there was a significant battle that the Israeli military said this week was the toughest battle since the war resumed. It was a 2.5 hour gun battle between the IDF and border police who were operating undercover. And the undercover unit moved into 𝐄𝐥𝐈𝐽, and as soon as they moved in, they were hit by a tunnel ambush that killed the initial fighters, the Israeli fighters, and then set up a 2.5 hour battle to try to extract those soldiers that were killed at first. So, like I said, the IDF said it was the toughest battle since the war resumed. 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐿, the Israeli newspaper, talked to the IDF, and they said there was a multi-layered tunnel ambush where 5 cells appeared one after another, targeting reinforcements, not allowing the Israeli military to get in. It was Yasin strikes, it was snipers, it was small arms fire against the Israeli units coming in. It took more than 2.5 hours to extract what was supposed to be an undercover ambush that was outed by a counter ambush by Qassam. There was multiple Israeli killed, including a tank platoon commander from the 401st Armored Division. That's the Iron Tracks division that the Qassam brigades have pointed out. The casualties from that unit are significant in the many dozens throughout this battle. So that is 𝐄𝐥𝐈𝐽 and Gaza City, eastern Gaza City. We've looked at the north here, and after this, we will move to the south. This is the map and what it looks like in the south. Rafah is completely cut off. It is a no-go zone, no population in Rafah. It's been completely depopulated, and the Israelis are in there knocking down whatever buildings remain from before. In the bottom of that image, below the Rafah crossing there, that's where Kerem Shalom is, the main crossing where food was coming in before the 61-day siege. That's completely closed at this point now. And the Morag corridor cuts across through that. You can see the dotted line. Essentially, the Morag corridor follows the governorate line between Rafah and Khan Yunis. And so there was operations by the resistance in the Philadelphia corridor, which is the purple line at the bottom along the border with Egypt. And then the Morag corridor that they're carving is up along that dotted line, essentially, that you see cutting Khan Yunis from Rafah. And there was a complex resistance operation in the Philadelphia corridor on the western side of the corridor this week. IED and small arms complex ambush that wounded at least 4 IDF soldiers next to Tel Sultan. Tel Sultan is on the western edge of the Philadelphia corridor. And also this week, during a promotional video for a new artillery rocket ammunition that the Israelis have been using in the Morag corridor, the Israeli military said that the 282nd Artillery Brigade has launched more than 5,000 shells and artillery rockets at the Morag corridor since they began that operation 2 or 3 weeks ago. And also, they took the military. They took Army radio on a tour of the Morag corridor, and while they were in there, the Army radio correspondent asks why there's not military pressure in Rafah, why they're only in these corridors, why is it very limited? Why don't we go for, quote, a big maneuver and get the real large centers of gravity of Qassam? And here, he says, is perhaps one explanation. The commander of the 205th Reserve Brigade of the Israeli military said that the only reserve brigade fighting in Rafah, and it reveals that of his fighters that have reported, barely half to 2/3 have reported back. So you have half of their reserve soldiers have not come back to continue the fight. They are either AWOL or on approved leave because they can't handle the war lasting this long. And so they don't have the fighting force to carry out the kind of maneuvers that Army radio seems to be calling for. So that's why we get these operations in the buffer zone. That's why we get these promotional videos of new weapons, because the Israelis aren't actually fighting in these areas, in these concentrations. They're not fighting Qassam. Qassam is in the same strength that they were before this. The war is against civilians. If we look at the next slide, this was a rescue operation that Qassam released this week. They said that the Israelis bombed a site where their captives, or the prisoners of war, who are all soldiers at this point, so Israeli prisoners of war. And Abu Ubaidah told us early on that they were not going to move captives from the areas that Israel put under evacuation orders. They were going to stay there. 15 days ago, Abu Ubaidah said that they lost contact with the American soldier who's fighting and is captured. 30 days ago was when they said they weren't moving prisoners from the evacuation zones. At this point, we know that there are 59 captives still in Gaza. 22 of them are alive, and they are soldiers. And so this is an interesting operation that Qassam showed that they're protecting. And we had to cut it out because we're not showing we haven't been showing any prisoners of war, but you can see at the end of this video, after they dig him out of the tunnel, which this video shows a lot. It shows a lot about the way the tunnels operate. And when they say they're cut off from, when Qassam releases a message saying that they're cut off from that fighters or guards or captives are cut off, you can see very clearly what it means there. That's a Qassam fighter digging in the tunnel. And we have cut out the part where the Israeli prisoner of war is given oxygen and his life has been saved. The Qassam fighters are speaking in Arabic and Hebrew to him, trying to follow him, and they say more details to follow on that. So that is the Resistance Report news from Gaza.